Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with GAE. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher and current president of GAE. And we have with us this evening.
I'm Joe Fleming. I have the privilege of working with Grace and Lisa at the state capitol.
Hello, I'm Grace Akan. Of course, I work with Joe and Lisa at the state capitol.
And our special guest this evening is Terrence Moore, and he has been an ally. We've been in a lot of these meetings this year at the House and Senate Education Committees, and when he's speaking, I'm cheering him on, and I hope he's cheering me on when I'm speaking. Welcome, Terrence, and tell our members a little bit about who you are and your organization, please.
Excellent. So I am Terrence Wilson. Thank you for that introduction, Lisa. Terrence Wilson, I'm the Regional Policy and Community Engagement Director for an organization called the Intercultural Development Research Association. We are an education equity nonprofit focused on creating educational equity for students across the South and across the country. And so I coordinate our regional policy work and a lot of our community engagement work. We do a lot of work with students, families, and educators just like you, trying to help them get prepared to be advocates to change education policy and practice. So super excited to be in the virtual space with y'all this evening.
Thank you. So Joe, we've still got a whole lot of really bad bills trying to censor what is happening in our classrooms. So give us an update.
Yes.
And tell us which ones we need to really talk about.
So there have been essentially 5 bills that try to regulate speech in the classroom pertaining to the role of race in American history and world history. Republicans started calling these critical race theory bills early on. They call them divisive concept bills, which is a term that was used by former President Donald Trump in an executive order a few years ago. These are bills that we believe would have a significant chilling effect on educators in the classroom concerning the teaching of things such as slavery, internment camps of Japanese in the United States, the Holocaust, a whole range of things. Grace has written eloquently on it, and Grace, you might want to speak to the issue and talk a little bit about your call to action, our call to action. And I will say this, one of the bills is SB 377 in the Senate. SB stands for Senate bill. That bill has been brought up 3 times in committee and has not yet passed the committee. It's not yet had a vote of the committee. It's a bill that ostentatiously the governor supports. There's another bill in the House, HB 1084, which is offered by Representative Will Wade of Dawsonville. That bill has not gotten final action in the House yet either. So it's interesting that they're not moving as quickly as some of the other bills that the governor prefers, but they're still there. And I think in one way or another, something like that, unfortunately, is probably going to pass this session, but we're working hard to contain and stop it. Grace, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other side of that coin of, sort of having a chilling effect on teachers and educators is just that it insinuates that educators aren't able to make age-appropriate decisions despite being certified by the state of Georgia, and instructional decisions should be made by the experts, and that's a position that I think GAE has been taking from the beginning. And to have politicians weigh in on instructional decisions is, and in some ways, insulting. To be honest, it's not letting the expert handle what they are best suited to do, but then also they just don't know. So. They're making missteps along the way, and we're trying to help clean it up. But at the same time, it comes from a place where I don't think it really can be cleaned up. Joe, you're still muted.
Thank you. Other thing I want to mention on these 2 bills, and then Terrence, we'd love to hear your perspective and what your analysis of the bills are and what you think about their prospects. The Senate bill still has a punitive aspect to it. that if a school district is found not in compliance with the bill when it presumably becomes law, that school district could lose 10% of their QBE funding. That is a significant penalty for someone who might misunderstand the bill, which is entirely reasonable considering how broad and vague the language is. It's a huge hit financially. The House bill started off also involving district attorneys, and I'm not a lawyer, Grace is, so correct me if I'm wrong, Grace, but district attorneys bring criminal cases, and they could have, under the original form of 1084, I believe, not only filed a complaint with the system, but possibly have taken criminal action against educators that might have been in violation of this. The good news was that GAE was able to get that DA language out of the bill. It does not make it a good bill. It does not mean it's a bill that we favor. In fact, we're strongly opposed to it. But we felt imperative to take the risk of sending teachers to jail or facing huge criminal financial penalties out of the bill was the appropriate action. Terrence, what are your thoughts on these bills and where we are and what we need to do?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that you all are right on the right track, thinking about the different places where these bills are, and thinking about how important it is for us to focus on them now, based before they continue on in the process. As you mentioned, House Bill 1084, right, has passed out of committee, and so it's available to be heard on the general calendar if it's in the Rules Committee right now. So I think part of the advocacy there is asking that, the bill maybe be recommitted. We've seen that happen to other bills that weren't quite ready, the language needed more work, or that the bill, not be put forward on the debate calendar with the Rules Committee. So that's one of the immediate asks. But one of the things that I think is important that for you all as educators to be focused on, particularly with 1084, as folks have kind of been painting this one as the lesser of the two bills because there is not a strict financial penalty, as mentioned with Senate Bill 377, which would have that 10% penalty. But this one does have, some penalties in it that we think are important. So 1084, the penalty procedures would impact waivers. And so, we know that these are things that schools are able to apply for, to let them be flexible, right, to provide different supports for their students, for educators, right, especially coming out of a time of COVID, right? Like, I think it's important for us to be, cognizant of, there may be some schools where waivers are really important, and so that is a penalty that may have an impact on some of the schools that we're seeing. And I think the other part of this is to really focus on the fact that 1084 verse 377 does have some provisions that are directly impacting educators. Okay. So I think that it's important for us to understand what all the penalties are. I got a birdie told me that waivers are not popular, and that's okay. But that is a part of the bill that would be a penalty, right? Just for us to understand kind of where some of the differences are. So I think that another piece of this is not only focused on what educators can teach in the classroom, as Joe mentioned. There are some provisions in there that are really going to limit the ability of educators to use their judgment that they went to school for, their years of experience, and talking about how to deal with issues around racism, classism, all different kinds of marginalization in our classrooms, right? We know that our educators are some of the folks who are best equipped to help our students process some of these things that are happening. I think it's really ironic that we're focusing on mental health in some ways, but we're not focusing on, the mental health that's what would allow students, particularly students of color, to talk with their educators in their classroom, the supportive environments, about some of the things that they're experiencing, right? Related to, systemic, racism and other kinds of things of that nature. So I think it's really important for us to understand the in-classroom impacts, but also looking forward to, the training, right? I think one of the things that 1084 does have in it that the other bills do not is there's a provision in there that would, prevent this, education around quote unquote divisive concepts from being included in the procedures for certifying education personnel, right? So we know how important it is for our educators to be able to have access to training to help them meet a diverse workforce, meet diverse students, right? Let them be able to have that that vocabulary to talk about these issues. And so this is not only going to impact current teachers, but it's also going to impact the future crop of teachers that we have coming in. And so I think that's one of the issues that I think is really important for us to not lose sight of, is that yes, there are real impacts in the classroom right now. We also have to be concerned about the next round of teachers that are currently in the process of being trained. I was having a conversation with some teachers in training in Georgia State, and we were talking about how this is scary for them, and some of them are rethinking about whether they want to go into the teaching field, right? And so we know that attrition is a huge issue, with teachers leaving the field right now based on what's happening, but also thinking about they have to find some way to replace those teachers that have left, right, due to pandemic and due to other things. And so how are we supporting our teachers in training to be able to?
Really good point, Terrence. I mean, I cannot imagine a job where I have the General Assembly looking over my shoulder, judging every comment that I make to find out whether it's in violation. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's
no. I think it's really important, right? We've seen in other states that we monitor, a push to put cameras on teachers, right? Like even you don't have cameras on other public officials that the police might not have body cam, but your teacher will, right? So I think that it's an interesting way that we're trying to reach into classrooms to have a really unusual level of control, and so I think I've heard Lisa and other folks, from GAE talk about the importance of, working with local schools and letting them be the places where our educators and our parents can work in tandem and in partnership. So I think continuing to beat on that, local control piece is really important as well. So I think that the space where we're in is, I think that as someone mentioned, the folks that are working on this legislation, they have been open to hearing from folks. Now we'll see what comes out. There has been a substitute for 1084. I think that there's going to be a substitute for 377. The bill sponsors at least give lip service to the ability or their willingness to work with folks who come to them. So I think that we should take them up on that offer and let them know what are some of the impacts that this is going to have on your ability to do your job, right? This is not a political consideration, right? This is something that's really going to impact, the folks who are on the ground trying to educate our young people. And so letting them hear what the impact's going to be for you. I know that's something that y'all are doing all the time, but I think it's really important for us not to lose that piece of it. And so, I think that the advocacy that we've already heard from community members, from students, right? There was at the hearing the other day for 377. I mean, there were, almost more than a dozen folks signed up. Everyone speaking, a lot of people speaking against these bills. I think we have to keep the pressure on. And then we've also seen, public pressure. So we've seen folks that are engaged in actions, right? Marches, protests, all those kinds of things, right? Just to keep the attention on this issue, because it is something that's going to have impact, but we just can't let it go forward without, being challenged. And we know because it's one of the governor's priorities, we know that this is something that does have a high likelihood of passage, but I think letting them know about some of the pieces of this that are really going to be the most detrimental and trying to do some harm mitigation for folks might be in the position that we're in, right? Obviously, if it were up to me, this bill wouldn't go forward at all, right? This is misguided from start to finish. But I think that the bill sponsors and the folks in committee, some of the committee chairs have at least in the Senate, they've been kind of open to hearing what some of the unintended consequences might be. And again, they're not educators, and so they will at least listen. So I think that might be one of our approaches: one, keeping the pressure up; two, making sure that we're letting them hear from educators about what are some of the real world impacts, and not being afraid to say, okay, this part of the bill, could you, this word would have this impact. You think you could have a different word? Like making suggestions like that, right. Recommendations, right? The more of that kind of stuff we can do, I think the better. So
But let's explore one other area. First of all, I want to say to the members that are watching, Lisa has testified both in the Senate and the House on this bill, and has been very effective and forceful in that. And Lisa, one of the things that you particularly talked eloquently about was about the wedge. Well, first of all, there are parental complaint procedures in these bills, and the wedge that some of these bills are maybe driving between educators and parents.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's going to happen, every teacher I know, every educator I know, we want our parents involved. We want parents to be involved in what's happening in the classroom. Everywhere you go, every newsletter you ever get from a teacher says, we need parent volunteers. Come observe. But this is really taking that and making it adversarial. And the parent, instead of the parent coming and talking to the teacher and saying, can you tell me what this lesson was about? You know, can you tell me what discussion happened in the classroom? Can you tell me why my child came home and said such and such? It's now going to be the parent filed a complaint. And then we get adversarial, and it's not, the focus then becomes he said, she said, or she said, she said, and not on the needs of the student. And in many cases, probably not on what actually happened in the classroom. One of the things that Terrence, you said over and over, we need to keep contacting them. And if you are watching us, I have put in the comments the link where you can click, and in 2 clicks, you can send a message to your representatives and your senators and tell them what this is going to happen in the classroom. One of the things that has been taken out of 1084, but is in the other bill, is that we can, well, 1084 says we can talk about racism, but it has to be in an academic appropriate manner or professional manner now. So I know educators are used to having those conversations with our students, but what happens if the teacher makes a comment and it's decided, well, that wasn't really a professional way of saying it? So that's still very concerning. One of the things that Terrence, I know that your organization also works on issues around the school to prison pipeline. And we know, we have counties here in Georgia. We know the discipline data is skewed, it's discriminatory, and we know that our children of color are more likely to be suspended or expelled. And so we need to be having those conversations as educators, as administrators. We need to be talking about, what are we doing in our school that is resulting in this disproportionate impact on our students? Can we have that discussion now if these bills pass?
The other thing, Lisa, you pointed out in your testimony was, not only does this create an adversarial relationship between parents and teachers, it also solicits teachers to file complaints against other teachers. It's just inviting trouble, it seems like, and that's not, I think, where we want to be. So yeah, Grace, I know Lisa just mentioned and put the link in on the call to action. Anything else you want to add to that about what GAE is doing in this area?
Sorry, I lost y'all for technical difficulties, but without hearing what she said, hoping that, of course, the call to action was broadly shared. Okay, so yeah, gae.org/campaigns. You can also find talking points and resources on these honesty in education issues and bills and censorship bills. I think maybe I just want to add that we are in a time where our leadership should be encouraging us to work together to solve the problems that have been exacerbated by COVID. And instead, we're seeing this slew of bills that is, I say, using educators as a proxy to dismantle public education, or at least make it really, really hard for public schools to operate for the best interest of the child. You know, educators have an ethical obligation to affirm every child in the classroom, every child in the school building. And when you have a baseline bills like these that undermine all of that, and then on top of that, exacerbate the problems that we're dealing with, I think it's unfortunate. And I think it's an abuse of power, to be quite honest. I said it, but you asked, so, you know, that's where I stand. And I think that there is unfortunately a hysteria at the Capitol that public school educators are having to deal with the fallout of, because it's what's sexy on the national level. And it's not right for Georgians. You know, we deserve better. Our educators deserve better. Our children deserve better. And our state requires better.
I said this last night, Grace. I feel like on the national level, and now it's trickling in here, it's not about doing what's right. It's about, we have been divided into teams. And if my team wins, your team loses. And that's all I care about.
Yeah.
I don't care that by winning, there's going to be an impact on my child or your child. I only care about winning.
Yeah.
And that's after the Senate Education meeting last week. I kind of feel like that was on display, that it was about winning, not about doing what needs to be done for teachers and students.
So we talked about some of these bills, and they have a parental complaint process in them. Then there are separate bills that are just set up procedures for additional complaints on school materials, instructional materials. I know we've got SB 226 that's passed the Senate, and I believe it's passed out of the Senate Non-Civil Judiciary Committee. And then we have 1178 in the House. These are bills that our members should be aware of. They blend a couple of different things, but they certainly get into the notion of censorship and parental involvement and complaints about instructional materials. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about that? And I know we've had discussions about whether it would include lesson plans. You know, if a parent wants to request the instructional material that's being used in their students' classroom, how would this impact educators, for example?
So it cites a specific law, and we looked that law up. And even during the House Education Committee, Matthew Wilson, one of the members of the committee, pulled the law book down and was looking it up.
You know,
and
they've never seen that before, by the way. You know,
yeah. Somebody actually looking it up. But that's what educators do. It says that the instructional materials that are approved by the Board of Education, not supplemental material. So supplemental material is considered the worksheets, the video, what is approved by the school board is the main instructional material. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would have said the textbook, but I know in a lot of systems now, they're not getting physical textbooks. They have they have digital textbooks. Lesson plans are not mentioned anywhere. So if they're not mentioned anywhere, they should not be included. However, when we asked the question, the sponsor of the bill said lesson plans are included. And so I don't know if anyone can truly understand what that requirement would mean. If parents are available to view lesson plans for 9 weeks and all instructional materials that are going to go with that, we're going to have to have a 2-week break between every 9 weeks of school for teachers to prepare that. And then it's not going to be valid and accurate because you won't know the students in some cases, and you won't know what's going to happen in the classroom. Because every year, at least 3 or 4 times, I've had a lesson that worked wonderful with the children the year before, and they understood the concept, and boom, and we could move on. And this year, for whatever reason, this group of children, that lesson didn't work. And you have to go in the next day and reteach the concept in a different way. And that's what good teachers do. But if I'm required to follow a plan I gave you 9 weeks ago, or 7 weeks ago, or 6 weeks ago, and I can't deviate from it because the parents haven't had an opportunity to review it, then I'm going to use one of the lines that my principal really didn't like. You're giving me a script and you're requiring me to follow a script. Actors have scripts. Teachers have lesson plans.
So I'm not sure I really adequately described this bill. This would basically codify in law a parent's ability to see and review the material the instructional material that's being used in a classroom. My understanding, Lisa, that's already being done. That's already a part of department regulations and rules. Teachers are begging for parental involvement, but again, we set up kind of an adversarial relationship between parents and educators. The bill goes into some tangents about getting prior approval from parents for photography and stuff, but I think the main impact here on educators will be what material, if a parent asks for it, needs to be provided. And I know in some states, I believe they have similar bills that require your lesson plans for the next year, which I mean, it just mind-boggling on how difficult and impossible that would be to comply with.
And can I hop in really quick, Joe? And,
Go ahead.
So another issue with these bills, one of the things that we're really concerned about is, you know, obviously the impact of trying to define obscenity in some of these bills. So, you know, folks know that this is a legal standard that came from Supreme Court, and then they've mirrored some of that language, but, you know, it's problematic for a couple of reasons. One, right, we know that, you know, the materials that students have access to, right, like a lot of those materials are protected, you know, and we have to have a really good reason for limiting what kinds of materials students are able to have access to. And so we're asking principals to be the people that are able to make this determination around, you know, like something is obscene, is not obscene. It's just a hard thing to put on just that one person who also has to deal with other considerations, right, with their job and their, you know, environment that they're in, right? So it puts principals in a tough spot. And it also, what we've seen is that in a lot of other states who have had these kinds of obscenity related, you know, prohibitions, it's not the things that you may think of, you know, like sexually explicit or stuff like that. What is often targeted is things that are, that reflect, you know, minority viewpoints. So that may be LGBTQ topics, that may be topics around anti-racism or, you know, that are critical of police. Like there are lots of different things. If you look at the American Library Association's top 10 most challenged books, right, you'll consistently see books that are challenged, not because they don't have, you know, pedagogical value. It's because, you know, the opinions are you know, talking about some of these issues that folks may find uncomfortable. And that's not, you know, that's not a reason that we should ban a book from being able to be used in a lesson, right? And one of the hearings that we had, you know, one of the legislators asked me about a lot of different things that might have been outside of, might have been a typical lesson, but I think, you know, in the hands of our educators, if there's an educational reason, right, and you have the right student that's mature and able to understand some of these things, right, there's there's not a reason to ban those things right off the bat. And so we're really trying to make sure that those kinds of materials are not targeted. And then while these processes are going on, one, the disruption that you all mentioned, right? Like if you have a challenge that's going to cause disruption, you got to do more work to prepare those materials, but also while the challenge is going on and those materials are sequestered, you know, like what does that do for the students able to access of those materials as well? And so I think that's another thing that we need to be very wary and cognizant of, is that although, you know, I think we all have a desire to protect our young people and a desire for them to be able to, you know, be in a safe environment when it comes to their education. But also, we also have to realize that, you know, just because there are things that we don't like, that's not a particularly good reason for banning them, right? And so it's, you know, likely, a lot of folks have said it's likely to lead to legal challenges. There have been lots of legal challenges across the country with states that have done this kind of thing. So that might be coming down the pike if this does go forward. So that's another cost and expense that your district and your state's going to have to pay for. But I think more importantly is just like, if we're wanting to have students have access to the best education possible, we want them to have access to as many different viewpoints, be able to learn about as many different topics as possible based on their maturity level and their, you know, their ability to handle that content. So I think it's not a good approach, right? We want to be broadening the scope of stuff that our students have access to, not limiting. And so that's another reason you know, beyond what you all have mentioned, in addition to what you all have mentioned in terms of the actual, you know, the cost and of time that it's going to take for teachers to have to respond to all of this stuff.
One thing I want to say about that, and you mentioned discomfort. Everyone has heard growing pains. You know, growth is painful. And when we're talking about ideas and understanding of what's happening in our world and things that have happened that have been oppressive to different groups, learning about that is uncomfortable. But you don't learn and grow without experiencing that growing pain. Literally, you have to be uncomfortable in order to grow in your thoughts and your understanding. Otherwise, it's just a simple intellectual exercise and you really don't, it's robotic. It's not real learning and real understanding of things. And I think that's something that, once again, these bills, I laughed because those of us, our younger viewers, our younger educators may not remember, but I clearly remember when Bill Clinton was being impeached, the famous line was, "That depends on what the definition of is." And everybody laughed that we were talking about the definition of is. Well, we have had legislators that have been saying that this is all about the definition of was and is. So we're trying to split hairs instead of just saying straight out, we need to allow our classrooms to be a place of learning and a place of discussion. And when these difficult conversations need to be had, trust educators to have those conversations. And I think part of this is, and again, the sponsors have said, this is about that tiny percentage of teachers that aren't going to do it right. Well, if you say it's only a tiny percent of teachers, then obviously you know who those teachers are. So why aren't you talking to them specifically instead of passing a law that's going to make it harder for every educator to do their job? But of course, we haven't been shown any specific examples of where something is happening that shouldn't be happening yet either. This is a solution in search of a problem, and it's probably going to cause a big problem.
Terrence, are there other bills that you're actively tracking or engaged with that we should talk about tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other one that I think is going to have an impact on your students is, these bills related to excluding transgender students from participation in athletics. And so I think that that's really problematic for lots of different reasons. We know that this is a very vulnerable population in our students, right? That it's a population of students that needs support, right? We know that they have additional challenges that make, like suicide rates and academics and all of that, like there are lots of different challenges that come with being a transgender student. And so I think that we've seen some of these bills move forward. So Senate Bill 435 is one that has moved out of the Senate. And so, it was passed and it has, not moved in a House committee as of now, right? But a lot of the conversation has been that we need to protect our girls from, students that are competing down or playing down, right? And so I think that whole framing is just a very deficit-based framing for our students. And I know that you all, right, like I know that educators work closely. Some of y'all might be coaches, some of you all might be involved in athletics in some way. And so I think that being able to speak to the value of athletics beyond just, getting the top score in a race or, like there are lots of different things that athletics is good for. I think a lot of the folks that played sports, right, the benefits went far beyond, just any kind of particular achievement. So one, it's mean because it's, particularly targeting a vulnerable group, but two, it's just not just good policy for helping our students like be successful and have access to things that are going to support them along their journey. So I would encourage you all, if you have any contact with any students, right? One, just like say that you support them, right? I think that's probably the most important thing, right? If you know trans students, if you know folks, students in the LGBT community, right? Like tell them that, despite these things that are happening at the state level, you're loved, you're affirmed, like you're valued, right? Like we don't want the messages that come from our state house to, be able to cause some of those negative impacts that I mentioned before. But two, I think it's really important for us to make sure that we, again, like let folks know what the actual impact of these bills are, right? Like you're going to have, and we've had, I will say that we've had, the parents of transgender athletes, we've had the teammates of transgender athletes come forward, and speak out against it, and it hasn't yet stopped them from moving forward. We're hopeful that this won't move forward, in the House, but I think it's important for us to be vigilant, and as educators, right, to be able to, if you're a host of a gay straight alliance or you're a safe space in your school, right, I think that those are students that you're working actively to support, and I think it'll be important to let legislators know, again, like how this is going to make your job more difficult in supporting those students. So I think that's one. And then obviously, thinking about, I think you all were mentioning earlier the thing around vouchers and how that's moving. That's the other bill that we think is really problematic for lots of reasons that I'm sure y'all are aware of. So I won't touch too much on that one, but that's the other area of bills that we're looking for. I will say that there are some things that we're trying to support. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. There's a House Bill 10, I believe, is one of the bills that we're supporting, and it's going to help students. Georgia is one of a few states that doesn't support students with additional weight for in their funding for students living in poverty. So that would address that. We've got there are two corporal punishment bills, and they're not in front of me, so I'm gonna, give me 1 second, I'm gonna find the number, but that's one of them that was proposed by folks in the House, and it hasn't had a hearing yet, so we're hoping to support a ban on corporal punishment. Georgia's also one of the few states that still allows for children to be paddled, spanked, hit in their classrooms, so we don't think that that's a good way for us to handle behavior. I think there are other approaches that we would like to see. And those are the main two that are coming to mind now. But also just, I think if you've got ideas that are good. Senate Bill 15 is the other one I was going to mention, which has to do with how we're teaching African American history and the contribution of Black Georgians and Black Americans to U.S. history. So that's another bill that has, it actually had a hearing only conversation, a brief one, but that's another one that we're supporting. So we're trying to, also not just be playing defense, to also try to start putting out our vision of what we think is important for our educators, or for our legislators to be doing to support public education. So those are just a handful, as we move forward. 892. Thank you for that, Grace. So those are a few other bills that we're supporting, that we're hoping, at least get hearings. We're trying to push the committee chairman to at least give these bills a hearing in the legislative session, even if they're not going to gain final passage. But I think it's important to not just, yell into the vacuum of what things that we don't like. I think it's important for us also to be articulating a positive vision for what we want to see in education. So I encourage you all, if you've got legislators that you're working with, and I'm sure the GAE has other things in that same realm that you're supporting, let's do that too, right? Because I think that's also important for us to move our state forward eventually, right? We got to start changing some of the narrative around some of these issues.
Yeah, I thank you for giving us some positives. There's two more positives that I want to mention that are going to be up in the House Education Committee actually tomorrow. And one of them is HB 1295. And this bill eliminates the adverse action for an educator that gets needs development on their evaluation. So we can still get a needs development, but the inability to renew your certificate because you got needs development, and the inability to move up on the salary schedule, i.e. taking some money away from you because you got needs development, would be removed. And that is up in it had passed the House Education Committee and has now come back to House Education tomorrow. And then the other one is House Bill 1283. And this bill, actually the exact same words, passed 2 years ago, the House and the Senate overwhelmingly, and was vetoed by Governor Kemp. And this is the bill that guarantees kindergarten through 5th grade daily recess. And I think this is one that everyone agrees that our children need more recess, they need more physical activity. So this is once again something that we are supporting. Several years ago, there was an ad for another recess bill that said, even prisoners get a break. What about our students? So that's one that we are supporting.
And of course, our waiver bills, which we're still working on. It's tough hearing on them because I'm afraid anytime you want to challenge the establishment or break a few eggs, some people don't want to stand in the way of that. Sorry, Lisa. I know you probably have a commercial or two you're behind on, but go ahead.
We're good. No, we're good. Yeah, so I don't think we have talked about the waiver bills on Facebook Live since Senator Jackson filed the Senate version. But Terrence, just so you know, the waivers that we don't like, well, we really don't like most of them. But the ones that we want, that are in the bill that Rebecca Mitchell filed and now Senator Jackson, to eliminate the waivers. We don't want waivers for class size. Mm-hmm. And that's, we want smaller classes. The waiver for health and physical education requirements. We want our kids to get as much health and PE as they can. For certification for teachers. We want qualified caring teachers in our classrooms, and educator fair dismissal. And I'm the teacher salary scale. And there's one more. There's 6 of them. Grace, which one am I forgetting?
teacher salary schedule, teacher certification, fair dismissal, class size, PE. You say PE?
Uh-huh.
Oh goodness.
We're going to have to look it up. But those are the ones that we don't want them to be able to waive. And we do, Joe and I and Grace, we have been talking that the waivers being put in House Bill 1084 and taking them away as a punishment is quite interesting, because up until we started talking about eliminating the waivers, nobody was even talking about the fact that we have the waivers. And Joe's saying, oh, duty-free lunch. That's
Oh,
the other thing,
gosh.
Grace. Yes. How could I forget duty-free lunch? And our educators who
Thank
aren't
you,
even
Grace.
getting a restroom break during the day. And for example, the recess bill now says if it passes, it can't be waived. So I think all these bills saying they can't be waived are, and is that not it, Joe? Are they saying it can be waived?
No, it needs that language.
It needs the language. Okay. Yes, it does. No, we could just eliminate the waiver system, and then we wouldn't have to keep saying, well, this is so important, it can't be waived. Yeah, I'll get off that soapbox, and I will take a quick second and throw a commercial in. I'm going to put in the comments the registration for our legislative contact team work session number 3, which is 1 week from today, next Wednesday. And we will be meeting with those of you who have signed up, or if you haven't signed up yet to be on our legislative contact team, we would ask you to join us. We will be contacting legislators that evening about these bills. And I'm sure if you haven't already, I did put in the comments our stop censorship action, and we would ask you to do that one. And while I'm doing this, I'll go ahead and throw in the link. Rights at Night for March is March 22nd. And this month, this is another issue I think we'll all agree on. Our Rights at Night this month is about voting rights, and qualifying is next week, and we all need to be preparing to vote in the primary May 24th. And so we're going to go through that evening what Senate Bill 202 did last year. So if you are planning to vote and you are planning to vote absentee, you're planning to vote early, however you're planning to vote, what you need to know before you head out your door, so you have everything you need, and so the process can hopefully run smoothly for you.
Well, we're talking about good news. The Senate Appropriations Committee has passed the updated budget for this current fiscal year. As you may know, it has one-time bonuses for educators in it. $2,000 for full-time educators, $1,000 for part-time educators. In the original bill, custodians were left out. GAE made it a priority to include them, and we were able to secure $8.5 million to include custodians in bonuses for this year. When it went to the Senate, they also increased the bonus for school nurses from $1,000 to $2,000. That's a fantastic accomplishment. And the bill also, the budget for the remainder of the school year limits fills in the money that was originally planned to be cut from public education and QBE. So budget situation looks pretty good for education. The Senate is voting on that tomorrow, and then we will head to the governor's office. The House is beginning now to look at the next year's budget, and it is in the next year's budget that you'll find the completion of the governor's $2,000 pay raise for a total of $5,000 that he promised during his campaign. So that's good news on the next year budget. Also includes full funding for QBE as well. I think, and Lisa and Grace have talked about this. I think our next major focus budget-wise is going to be on starting teacher salaries, which continue to fall behind our neighboring states. In fact, I think Mississippi is ahead of us already and is about to take a quantum leap ahead of us in terms of educator starting salaries. So, but some good news on the budget front also.
I need to let everyone know, Carly and Sharon weren't able to be with us tonight, and we're missing them. So since Carly isn't here, I have to ask Carly's question of Terrence. Carly Shaw, our secretary treasurer, asks this question every week of our guests, so I'm going to ask it. And that is, why do you do what you do?
Oh man. So I do what I do because, I started my career, so I'm an attorney like Grace, and I originally wanted to do juvenile defense. And so I spent a lot of time speaking with young people who found themselves in the juvenile, detention and the juvenile justice system, and a lot of the source of the issues that they had across the board. A lot of them started in schools, and I think, I saw over and over and over again that, if you have a place where you can create a supportive, culturally sustaining school environment that's taking care of the mental health of our young people, making sure that they have the things they need to thrive, that you can stem off some of these more negative outcomes that we see related to juvenile justice and all other kinds of negative outcomes for young people. So I think that, I believe in the balanced potential of our public education system if we are working together and using the supports that we know are going to work to improve the experience of our kids. And so I think that, what little bit I can do to help, educate folks around how to be involved with those systems, to tell their own stories, a little bit I can do to translate those stories with policymakers and legislators and folks at any level. I think that will be a good thing for me to do, just because I think that our public schools are places that our young people should be able to go to get what they need to be, successful, productive citizens. So I believe in the potential of us, and I do the work so I can, keep helping us get closer and closer to that vision.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about your organization, please.
Sure. So IDRA has been around since the 70s. We do a lot of work around policy, advocacy, and community engagement. We also operate one of 4 federally funded equity assistance centers. And so through the EAC South, we provide free technical assistance to school districts, schools, state agencies all across our 11-state region, which is the U.S. South. So if you think DC and Virginia down to Florida and over to Texas are the states in our region. So we have lots of different schools, state agencies, school districts that we're working with around equity issues related to race, religion, national origin, and gender. So if you are an educator and you're working in those places and you've got a supportive school district and school leadership, we can provide some assistance for folks in that capacity. And then we're based in San Antonio, Texas. So we've done a lot of work in Texas over the past few years, trying to figure out different ways to help our educators that we're working with in our EAC address some of the policy concerns that create some of the inequities that they're having to deal with on the ground. And so that's kind of where we are building out our connection there, is that we want our family engagement, family leadership model is focused on policy and practice. And it's really about making sure that students and educators and parents and caregivers and all those folks have the same information that we have in order to help educators or help policymakers make better decisions for their kids in their schools. So I'm our regional person, but I'm located here in Georgia, but I do work all over the Southeast region. So if you are an educator in Georgia, you're working on equity issues, if you have a school system or even a local school that's working on equity issues and you need some support, I highly encourage you all to check out our website. One of the other things that we're doing right now is we're helping to coordinate some of these classroom censorship conversations. And so we've got a link that I hope I can drop into the Facebook Live, or I can have a friend maybe drop into the Facebook Live for me.
Yeah.
But we've got a coalition that is formed to fight against classroom censorship. So you've got over 100 people we meet on Monday evenings to kind of strategize and coordinate. We've got young people, we've got educators, parents, folks of all different kinds of perspectives. So if you have an interest in working on this continuously, in addition to what the work is the GAE is doing, please feel free to join up with us, and we'll share information and we'll work on this together. And we know that the legislature is only going to be in session for a limited time, but the work will continue in your local schools. And so we also want to provide folks the support they need to do that. We've got lots of cool things that are going to be coming up. We've got an educator resource hub around culture sustaining schools that's going to be coming out soon. We've got resources for folks that are teaching cultural and ethnic studies, African American, Mexican American studies, those kinds of things. We've got all kinds of fun stuff. So if you're interested in education equity, which I'm sure you all are, feel free to check us out and let us know how we can be a support to you.
Great. I hesitate to ask this. We're halfway through the session. So what are we expecting? Where are we going? It's kind of been, I don't want to say, it hasn't been fast and furious quite yet, but we're probably going to
say that, Lisa.
I know, that's why I said I hesitate to say it, because the movement's going to hit us tomorrow.
Yeah.
So are there things that we might surprise us that's going to happen?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think for us, there are some of the things that we know didn't go forward, and versions of these bills. So, right, we know that this current version of the censorship kind of legislation doesn't have the penalties for librarians, right? These things may come back again in the end as they move forward throughout the process. We would hope that they wouldn't. So we're just staying vigilant for any kind of curveballs. I think that this one, because it is such a short session, and the governor outlined very clearly what his priorities were, I think that the appetite to do some of these other things that are not in that priority list may be less than in other years, but they don't pay me enough to know what's going to happen down there. So yeah, I think we're just, this being the second year of the biennial session, I think we're taking a close look at those things that we think are dead, but that we may, folks really may want to have come back before the session ends and before we go into an election season. So I think that there probably will be some things that we thought were dead that rise from the grave here closer to either crossover day or sine die at the end of the session. So I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm thinking sine die is coming. Sine die will be the end of the session. Crossover day is coming soon, and that is when the bills that we thought were dead and gone arise from their graves. Joe, is there any that we're looking at?
Yeah, so crossover deadline is important because that's the day that a bill must pass the chamber in which it was introduced to be eligible for further consideration. However, you've got folks who have bills that will not have made the deadline, and they are going to be looking for other bills to tack the language that they want onto another bill. And that will include probably vouchers. We celebrated a little bit of a victory when the speaker announced that that those voucher bills are dead for this session. But make no mistake, there are advocates of spending tax dollars on private school tuition that will continue to look for ways to resurrect that bill. And I would not be totally surprised to see an attempt to add it to a bill. The speaker was pretty clear, but there will be those working toward that outcome. Lisa, I just want to add one other thing before I know we're running out of time. Thanks to everybody who is on the call tonight, who attended our day at the Capitol. Really appreciate it. We had a very enthusiastic and engaged group that showed up, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of that. That is an important event for GAE, for us to introduce members to legislators, to lobby on behalf of specific issues, and I'm grateful for the turnout and the enthusiasm.
Yes, definitely. And before we go, it is 7:30. Our hour seems to fly every week. Terrence, thank you so much for being with us this evening and talking about some of these things, and look forward to seeing you at the Capitol
Absolutely.
as
Thank
we
you all for
try.
having me and the work that you all do. Thank you for letting me share the space. And
Yes,
I'm a huge fan of the work that you all are doing. So
thank you.
thank you.
And we will see you all here in 2 weeks on March 16th for our next Facebook Live, and everyone have a great evening.